Set in 850 AD, Architects of the West Kingdom is a worker placement game where players collect resources, hire apprentices, construct buildings, work on the cathedral, and maybe even partake in some less than honorable tasks, all in hopes of impressing the king. Earn the most victory points and be crowned victorious and become the king's favorite architect of the West Kingdom. If, at the end of this video, you like what you saw, why don't you hit that like button? And if you like the Nerd Shelf series, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. It would really mean a lot. Thanks! As a worker placement game, players start with 20 workers, which they use to carry out a variety of actions. Like most worker placement games, players take one worker from their player mat and place it on the main board, carrying out that action. However, unlike most worker placement games, most locations in Architects of the West Kingdom are not limited to just one worker. In fact, players are rewarded for gathering multiple workers in locations to gather more resources and carry out extra actions. For example, if a player places a worker at the quarry, they receive 1 stone. But on the next turn, if they place another worker at the quarry, they now gain 2 stone. A third worker gains 3 stone, and so on. In the same way, players can place workers in the forest, silversmith, and mines to receive wood, silver, clay, and even gold. Adding more and more workers to a location is a great way to maximize your benefits. But don't get too confident, because if an opponent feels like you're amassing too much at any one location, they can take one of their workers on their turn and place it in the town center, recruiting the townspeople to capture your workers, sending them to their player mat, which they can later sell at the prison. Whether you sell captured workers quickly or get greedy and wait to capture more to receive even more silver is a tricky balancing act. Wait too long and players can rescue their workers for a cost, leaving you with nothing. This selling and rescuing of workers is done at the guardhouse. By placing a worker here, players can choose as many actions as they have accumulated workers. Players can sell all of their opponent's captured workers, sending them to prison and collecting silver. Or they may release for free any of their workers already in prison, bringing them back to their player mat. And finally, if you don't want your opponents to collect silver, you may pay a price to rescue them from opponent's player mat before they have a chance to sell them, bringing them back to your mat. Other than just gathering resources, players will also need to build buildings. But in order to do this, players need to acquire building plans and hire apprentices, which can be done at the workshop. After placing a worker at the workshop, players can choose the number of plans according to how many workers they have. They may keep one, placing the rest back under the deck. Or they may choose to hire an apprentice. Again, the number of workers determines which apprentices are for hire. But a little bribe never hurt anybody. Players may also put silver on apprentices to skip them in order to hire the next in line. Now that you've managed to gather resources, acquire building plans, and hire apprentices, it's now time to start the king's construction. All construction in Architects of the West Kingdom happen by placing a worker at the guild hall. By placing a worker here, players may choose to construct one of their buildings. To construct a building, players need to pay the resources shown and also have hired an apprentice matching the skill at the top of the card. Not only do constructed buildings offer immediate effects and ongoing privileges, but each building gives players endgame victory points, as indicated by the yellow flag at the top of the card. Instead of constructing a building, players can also advance work on the cathedral by paying the resource, and discarding one of their building plans. They then move their player marker up the cathedral track, indicating endgame victory points. And as a bonus, they can take one of the bonus cards, collecting the resources, usually a virtue and a good. The guild hall is where players will receive the bulk of their endgame victory points. And while working on the cathedral and constructing buildings in your town are both honorable and noble, temptation and corruption still exist. If you're short of cash and need a quick payoff, why not a smash and grab? Throughout the game, any payment marked in red gets sent directly to the tax stand, seducing players as it builds and grows. Players have the option to send a worker to the tax stand and collect the spoils. Or, if you're short on resources, why not dabble in the black market, where valuable resources can be gained? For a fee, of course. While these temptations may offer a quick reward, there's always a penalty. On the side of the board is this virtue track, which represents how honorable and noble players are. Good deeds such as working on the cathedral or hiring certain apprentices reward players by allowing them to move up the virtue track. However, being caught dabbling in the black market or robbing the tax stand punishes players as they move down the virtue track. Moving up the virtue track gains players endgame victory points, and being noble means you are no longer allowed to enter the black market. However, slipping down the virtue track loses players endgame victory points, and being scandalous means you are no longer allowed to work on the cathedral, but you may skip your taxes. To add insult to injury, not only does going to the black market lose you virtue, but when the last spot is filled at the black market, this triggers a black market reset phase in which all workers are sent directly to prison. Round and round the players go, placing workers, collecting resources, hiring apprentices, constructing buildings, honorably working on the cathedral, or nefariously thieving and dealing, until the last worker is placed at the guild hall, which triggers the end game. At this point, all players get one last turn, and then everybody calculates their victory points, and the player with the most victory points is crowned victorious and dubbed the king's favorite architect of the West Kingdom. So, there you have it. Architects of the West Kingdom. Now, I have to start by saying the predecessor to this game, the game that came out before this, is one of my favorite games. It's called Raiders of the North Sea. Another worker placement game that I just adore, especially with all of the expansions added to it. I love the idea in that game of placing a worker and doing the action and then taking another worker away and doing the action. I just thought that was a really great twist on the usual worker placement game. So when this game came out, another worker placement game, I was wondering what they could do differently to make it as good as Raiders of the North Sea. Well, I just love the mechanic of placing a worker and getting a resource, placing another worker and getting more resources, and building it up and building it up. But if you build it up too much, then your opponents are going to capture your workers and sell them off to prison. I just absolutely love that. It's just another twist to a worker placement game that I think works great, and it is what makes this game, in my opinion, as good as Raiders of the North Sea. In fact, base game to base game, this might be a little bit better. I'm not sure. It's pretty close. They're both fabulous games. Architects of the West Kingdom is in my top 10 games. I love it. My family loves it. And everybody I've played with loves it. So, if you've played Architects of the West Kingdom, why don't you comment below? Tell us what you think about it. And if you like the Nerd Shelf series, please click that subscribe button below as well. All right, that's it for this episode of Alphabet Games. So go get another game off of your nerd shelves. Take care. Bye.